So without further ado, let me invite him on the stage. So you can try to come on the stage, sit next to me. Perfect. So I don't want to talk about your company because you're already on the stage. So I can do as much intro as you like. Have you prepared any material to share with the audience?
I have. Should I start sharing my screen perhaps? And thanks for the intro, Keith. That was very kind of you. All right. Is my screen sharing properly?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so thanks, Keith, for the intro, and thanks for having me. I have been very excited and really looking forward to this, both this talk, but also just the program itself. I think it's a great step for especially Web3 developers who are looking to get started. So I thought what I'd do today is I'll start by talking about Niftory, like Keith said. I think it can actually help folks who are trying to build, especially NFT applications. So I'll just give a very quick overview of that. I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then we can go into my startup journey. Like Keith said, I come from big tech. I worked on a bunch of stuff over the last decade in a closed environment in a couple of big tech companies. So how did I make the transition from that to a startup world? There are some lessons. It's been a year and a half now since I have been building Niftory. So I feel like I've gone to school again to kind of unlearn some things, relearn new things. And so I want to talk about a few of the lessons I've learned. But most of the time, I just want to give back to folks to just ask any questions they have as they get started on their journeys. So if that sounds good, maybe we can just get started. So very quickly, I'm a software engineer by training. I've spent a decade working in big tech, mostly on developer tools and machine learning. And so I started my career at Microsoft. I was there for about 6 years, worked on tools like VS Code, which you might have used on Windows. Every time you log into Windows 10 or Windows 11, there's a part of the code base that I wrote that runs to authenticate you, which is pretty cool. And then I was an engineer and engineering manager at Facebook, where I built the Facebook's Jupyter Notebook platform and a couple of other tools for ML engineers. And my startup journey, as we'll talk about a little bit later, is kind of very organic. Niftory started as a side project, and the reason I even started working on this side project was I became an engineering manager at Facebook, but I still wanted to code on the side. And I was like, let me, instead of micromanaging my team at work, let me direct my energies towards something on the side. And very quickly, it became serious and turned into a startup, and the rest is history. So what Niftory does is it provides a set of APIs for web developers, especially those who aren't blockchain engineers, which is the vast majority of web developers. It provides them with a set of APIs to interact with the blockchain and abstract away the blockchain complexity. And it's the easiest and fastest way, we really believe, to launch a Web3 experience, especially for NFTs. And so we have a set of APIs. We run a whole infrastructure database computes for you in the cloud. And it essentially allows you to handle the blockchain, the application, and the integration side, which every Web3 app needs to do. You need to figure out how to interact with IPFS and build smart contracts and select the right blockchain. You need to then have an application level component that interacts with both the blockchain, but also some cloud infrastructure to host your app, unless you're building a dApp. And then you have some integration with digital wallets and marketplaces and all that. And so we have a set of APIs for each of these things. And so, for example, you get a smart contract that we've already built for you. You can just deploy it with a click of a button, and then you can use APIs to create NFTs. You can create them off-chain and design them until you get it right, and then you can mint it. You can airdrop it. You can have it behind a paywall. You can really control the experience however way you want. But it's just a bunch of API calls that every web developer can make. And all the blockchain stuff is kind of hidden behind our infrastructure. We also provide wallets, so you can create custodial wallets for your users really easily. And so one of the popular things is you want to have people sign in with Google, but then you want to create a custodial wallet for them silently so that they never have to worry about wallet onboarding during their onboarding process. Because like creating a crypto wallet is still pretty complicated for the vast majority of users. And finally, we have like an admin panel, which is more of a no-code tool for you to manage your experience and manage your app. This is where you find your API keys, where you manage your contract. You can even create NFTs through here. And so, yeah, this is an example of an experience where like this tool called nextname.io, they have US basketball, college basketball players that they create NFTs for. And you can buy those NFTs with a credit card, which our API support. Like all the things that are minted, the user login, all of that is powered by Niftory. I won't go into too much more detail there, but if you are starting an NFT project, do check out niftory.com and you can get started for free on testnet. And so let me know. And I think you have my contact info as well. So I'd be happy to like help debug stuff as well if you run into any issues. All right, so with that, let's get into a detail. I thought I'd start with like a couple of lessons I've learned so that hopefully you don't have to learn them the hard way as you get started on your startup journey. The biggest thing to notice is everyone's startup journey is a little different. I grew up kind of poor, and so for a long time in my life, my perspective was building financial stability. And I think part of that affected me and how risk averse I was overall. And maybe still am, but it's shaped by my upbringing, and everybody has their own experience that shapes them. Despite that, still had a dream, but never the courage to build a startup. And so it's less of an arc. I wish I could say like I planned X, Y, and Z, and that resulted in this, but it was more of an organic zigzag. Like, for example, I met my co-founders completely by luck. I was really good friends with one of my co-founders' wife, who was trying to convince me to work at a nonprofit at the time. And so like we just became friends, and one thing led to another. And my co-founder Ranir got really into NFTs a year and a half ago, and he kind of pulled me into this new world that I had very little context on. And we met another co-founder because of like other serendipitous moments. So there's always this organic part of life, and you never know where it takes you, but it's nice to look back at it in hindsight. The other important thing is they were the ones, my co-founders were the ones who gave me the energy and the inspiration to take this risk and take this plunge. And what I learned from that was like you need people around you who can kind of help you do things that you may not do by yourself. And so like I mentioned, we've made plenty of mistakes, but we've also done plenty of things right in the last year. And so this was a good opportunity for me to reflect on some of those things and try to whittle down what those lessons are. And so the first one is really like allow yourself to make mistakes, right? For many of you, this is going to be the first time you're building a startup. And it's inevitable, like anything else, you're going to make mistakes. And so just be kind to yourself. The point is not to never make a mistake. It's just to improve and iterate as you go about doing that. And don't make the same mistake twice, right? So you want to give yourself space to fail. Kind of like think of how kids learn, right? The reason that like I think kids learn really quickly is also because they're not afraid of failing. They don't have egos, they don't have all those like insecurities yet, and so they're able to like make lots of mistakes and iterate very quickly from there. And that's also kind of the biggest difference between a startup and an established company. That like when I first left Facebook, it was like shocking because there are no rails, there are no processes. You kind of get to define all that, and so that's like very liberating and very empowering because you have to think about so much more than you could at your specialized role at a larger company. But with that freedom, you also get like a bunch of questions that are really fundamental to your startup, like company design, right? Like how should your hiring process work? What kind of interview questions should you ask that tailor to your needs? What's the execution model for your startup? Like how much do you invest in tech upfront? who is doing the marketing and business development. And you have to like think very consciously of all of these things in a way that you may not have before. So just allow yourself to make those mistakes. And then the second part of that, alongside that, is really work with the absolute best people you possibly can that you know in your life, because a startup is it's very different from a regular job. It's almost like going to battle in some ways, because there's a lot of camaraderie with your co-founders. It's a small group of people, and so who would you kind of like depend on for your life, right? You're entrusting your career and your future and your co-founders, and so you want them to be the very best people who you completely trust, and more importantly, like who you'll have a lot of fun building this kind of stuff with. And the other thing is, as you grow, hopefully, in your startup journey, both personally but also as your company gets bigger, the way that the company operates in those earliest days, that tone is set by those early founders and employees. And so if they're making the right decisions, if they're the right set of people, and if they are setting the right tone, then the next set of hires that you'll make are gonna follow along with that tone. So be very, very picky when you get started. The other thing I learned, or rather unlearned, was that basically like how you build at an established company and how you build in a startup is very different. Many of you might have already figured this out. I was a little slow to learn this. I always saw like startups being very chaotic, and I was like, they probably don't know what they're doing. But now that I'm actually like building one, I'm like, actually, there's a lot of method to this madness. And reflecting upon it, a lot of the reason is because of the maturity of the phase of the company you're in. So when you're an established company like Microsoft, you have all these giant products that like the whole world uses. And so then your problem is like, how do you handle the scale? How do you satisfy every person and every like jurisdiction? And like, how do you perfect the system? Because you know you have a repeatable strategy for growth. When you're a startup, you're still validating your basic idea. And in that case, you can't wait for perfection, right? So if you're validating your idea and you recognize that's the phase you're in, just like hack your way to an MVP to get it in front of customers as fast as possible. Because your goal isn't to perfect it, your goal is to validate that it's even a valid thing. And if you haven't found product market fit, iterate very quickly and just keep trying many things. It goes back to like allowing yourself to make mistakes. You're not gonna necessarily figure out the first time, but if you like can squeeze 20 iterations in 2 months, then you have a much higher probability of success. And then like don't invest in paid advertising, for example, until you have a very repeatable strategy for acquiring customers. And so like if you think about it from the perspective of you see all these like small nimble startups that eventually upend large companies, right? And you think of like, how does that happen? And the biggest thing that you have to your advantage, it's not money, right? Like the big company can always outspend you, they can always outwork you, but what you have is flexibility, because those are large ships and they move kind of slowly in changing direction. But as a small scrappy startup, you can afford to like move very quickly and change course on a whim. And so really embrace that and don't give up that power. The other thing I learned is like identify your blind spots. This is kind of an oxymoron because it's like a contradiction, right? You have blind spots by definition, so how do you identify them? But for example, for Niftory, everybody who came to work here was like from a technical product engineering background. So we didn't spend as much time early on like figuring out our marketing channels or like growth hacking and all that stuff. And that was our blind spot, and we're trying to rectify that. And we still have to like fight our natural urge to just like focus on building all the time. There's also like your most basic assumptions you might be making that you think are obvious, but you really want to validate those, because everything you work hard on that's based on that assumption could turn out to be wasted effort unless you are like sure that this is the right direction. And so just like think of your own blind spots and constantly evaluate what you might be missing. And this took me a while. Honestly, this is the hardest thing for me. Is like there's an emotional roller coaster, especially if you do startups for any length of time, whether they're being successful or like being unsuccessful. There's an emotional roller coaster involved in all of them. They're really hard work, right? And you need to find joy in that. And so like you need to find joy, you need to question like, why am I doing this in the first place? What are my principles? What am I trying to bring out to the world? And if you can have the right set of reasons for yourself for doing that, that in itself, like even if there's hard work and like intensity involved, it can still be joyful as a result of that. And then there's also like, because you're constantly like changing direction and like trying to experiment, there's a lot of like just embrace the roller coaster of some days might be euphoric and other days you might like have a bad news that brings you down. You can't control those events, but you can kind of control how you react to them. And that's it from my side. I want to just open the floor up for a bunch of questions. There are a lot of things we didn't talk about. This was a very quick overview. I didn't talk much about Web3. I thought I'd start with like the basic ingredients, but hopefully that helped. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you folks.
Super awesome. I feel like I'm listening to like a tech talk. Just like very concise about all learning, your experience, ups and downs, very simple language. Thank you a lot for sharing. We're definitely touching some of the items that you miss, right? The Web3 specific questions, evaluating some ideas. We're going to nail it down in the upcoming like 40 minutes. I promise to ask all the deep questions for you.
Meanwhile, let's do it.
So meanwhile, we have a chat room function. If you guys have any questions you want to ask our guests, just like type it out. We'll try to fulfill your requests. Particularly, I mean, if you are recently being affected by the layoff news, if you're looking to transit from the big tech or big companies to Web3, Sarmad is one of the really the go-to guy in today's mentor section. He knows about what's happening, the whole mindset, all the technicality from the companies, how to overcome the team dynamic. I mean, like he just make things really like humble ways. So for now, let me kind of ask questions. Yep, you could actually disable the screen sharing function.
Yes, let me do that.
Yeah, first of all, definitely going to ask a bit more questions on the mindset culture change from the big tech into Web3, right? But the first question I ask is like, do you regret your decision in the past 1.5 years?
Not at all. I've thought about that a lot. I thought I would regret it more, honestly, because you are giving up a lot, right? I gave up job security. I gave up like a very fast growing career. But what I reflected on afterwards was, first of all, I'm not really giving that up. There's always a time in your life where you can go back and like do that again. But there's only a limited time in your life when you both have the energy, will, desire, and like the right group of people to build a startup with. Don't take that for granted. This is the more rare experience. And I've learned so much in the last 1.5 years that like if I compare how much I've learned here to how much I learned in the previous 1.5 years, it's like immeasurably more. And so not at all, no regrets. Even with like I'm in a Web3 startup, bear market, right? And like, so hopefully that tells you something that even despite all of that, I'm still like so gung-ho that this was the right decision.
Okay, going back to 1 decade ago, do you regret you actually work in two of the most like well-known tech companies in the world? When you started yourself live a decade ago, and probably now you are already exited entrepreneur turned investor. Do you regret?
That's such a good question. I think I mentioned part of this earlier, that I was very focused on building just financial stability in my own life, and so I don't think I could have done this earlier than when I have. Maybe if I was more courageous. I'm sure some of you are more courageous than I am. Like that is I do regret, like what I do regret is when you're younger and like you're just starting out your career, you can like feel more free, because you don't have those golden handcuffs. You don't have a lot of like sometimes family commitments and whatnot. But I don't regret it from the simple perspective that I also learned quite a bit on like how to do good engineering and how to organize a team, how to be a manager, and all of those things that like you can learn at a startup, but you'll like make more mistakes getting there as you go on. And so it's like I said, everyone's startup journey is different, and so just embrace your own and go from there.
What's kind of in the early journey? Like, what's kind of in the point that you say like, okay, let me quit the job at Facebook. Let me fully into
Yeah.
the new journey. What's kind of could spark points?
It's a good question. I think we did this as a side project for, like I mentioned, for a while, and we actually started seeing traction. Right, like there were customers who started paying us to build Web3 experiences. Like we started building NFT marketplaces for a couple of small people. Like there was this rap battle group that wanted to like sell NFTs as part of their like season going on. A bunch of people, but it gave us a little bit of confidence that we are trying to target a market that has value. And then the second thing was actually my co-founders, where they were so passionate and dedicated, where I'd never worked on a side project where people were this serious about it before. And so that they actually gave me the confidence that, okay, I can actually kind of like see myself doing this full time with this group of people because they're so serious about this. And I think it was hard for me. I had like at Facebook, I had a team of, I was a manager for a team of 14 engineers, and I'd hired most of them. And it was my first time leaving a company where I was a manager. So it was almost like leaving a family. It was very emotional, but I think like over the course of a 6-month period, I tried to transition things off slowly and tried to create the conditions for me to leave in a more seamless way.
Yeah. So two co-founders can actually be more like appealing to you comparing to like a big firm. So like 40 engineers that you build from scratch, right? There's something happening with these like co-founders. Apart of these
Exactly.
people being very like serious, what other like criteria or like the charisma or let's say like characteristics you found from the co-founders?
They need to be intense as well. I think like there is an intensity to startups, especially the early stage where you're building everything from scratch, right? Like you need to figure out HR, you need to figure out the legal stuff, you need to figure out like just AWS things, and you may not be an expert in any of these, but you have to be willing to get your hands dirty and really just like go do whatever needs to be done to unblock the next phase. And there are like dozens, maybe hundreds of these things you have to do along the way. And the willingness to be able to do that without thinking, oh, this isn't my job, this is like someone else's thing. That is really critical. Every founder in your team should have that ability to like learn something that they've never done before, figure it out, do it, and unblock the team. And I found that with this group of people. There's like very specific things that for example, some of them have that I don't have, and so our skills complement each other as well. One of them has had experience talking to investors quite a bit, and that helps us a lot, right? Especially in the early days. And another one is a very solid like infrastructure engineer who knows AWS inside out. And I don't know if anyone here is using AWS, but it's not the most simple thing to use and set up, even for like experienced software engineers. So just like look for complementary skills, but mostly look for the intensity and the willingness to get your hands dirty.
Cool. I really like the complementary skill set, right? As an investor investing, you don't. I mean, like part of that, they kind of see like which company are you from, what's experience,
Yeah.
whether you have the knowledge in the industry, but definitely whether you guys can support each other on building something really hands-on. I believe there's some audience now shaking, or your mind start shaking, saying like, maybe I should quit my job, right? I mean, what we learned in the previous financial cycle is like there are many cool companies born with this period of time because people want to get a job, There's
Yeah.
some change with the whole economy, right? What was kind of your comments on there's no better time to start a company?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things there. One is it's almost impossible to time the market, right? Like if you're investing in the market, the seasoned investors always tell you don't time the market because you can't. And if the best investors in the world are saying that, then I'll listen to them. In a similar way, it's almost impossible to time the market for you to like decide when is the best time for you to start a startup. Also, if you think about like when you want to get started is ahead of the curve before the demand and the supply kind of normalize. Because by the time like there is a lot of hype about something, generally speaking, it's kind of like already too late to get deep into the initial phase, and you have to like wait for the next wave then. And so you're almost taking a leap of faith when you're getting started. You're betting on yourself that you'll be successful, and you're betting on a couple of things about your business. So for Niftory, for example, our bet remains that Web3 is new. It's a small space currently, but we expect more and more traditional web developers to utilize Web3 technologies in the near future. And so our platform is geared towards that group of people that like you don't have to be blockchain engineers, you're web developers, you want to get started with Web3 technology like NFTs. How do you get started very easily and very quickly? And so we're trying to enable that. But that's a big bet we're making. It's an assumption, and you want to validate that assumption. We are on the right track to validating that assumption, but like that's what an early stage startup needs to balance is like a healthy dose of almost like belief and conviction as well. And that comes from your intuition, it comes from your belief in yourself, and it comes from like some understanding of the market that you're trying to target. And so I would say if you feel really passionate about something in general, if you feel like you're waking up every morning thinking about it, excited about it, and you're not getting that from your day job, then maybe starting a startup is a great idea for you. Because like there's why hold back essentially, especially if you're healthy and you have the ability to have the energy to give to a project. The last thing I'll say to that is you can also be like I mentioned with like trying to be iterative and scrappy as a startup. You can be iterative and scrappy for like the whole life cycle of this, right? So you don't have to get started by quitting your job. You can get started as a side project. You can get started by like finding a couple of people who might become your co-founders in the future, to like work on side projects with. And you can take it very seriously. You can have like deadlines and like basically go through the motions of what you would in a startup, but you don't have to quit your job to get started. And just like think of other steps that you can take to just get you going, because getting started is the hardest part. All those other decisions, they like kind of can happen organically once you get going.
Okay, we'll talk about the hard stuff, the early stage, as much as we can. So, how do you validate your idea? And what really the key assumptions in the beginning, right? So there are a couple like segments of target audience that I can think of, right? One
Yeah.
are those who are already seasonal like developers, either in Web2, Web3, who's really smart in coding. The second section of that is like the junior kind of like developer, and the third section is like a newbie, right?
Yeah.
Have you tested all of them? How did they evolve in early stage? Who have you talked to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so a lot of it comes with experimentation. You want to be very, very organized about how you do this and how you track the results. So one of the mistakes we made early on was we started by, we were thinking we'll target large enterprises as our cohort, as our customer. We were thinking like at the scale of Starbucks and Reddit and, like those companies that have launched Web3 experiences that have gotten pretty popular. But very quickly, what we realized was either those companies are like large enough to just hire their own blockchain engineers and like build everything in house because they want to customize everything, or they work with these external like large blockchain directly. Like Reddit worked with Polygon, and Starbucks worked with Polygon as well. And so we were basically like essentially discarded that as a user group, because we were like, as an early stage startup, that doesn't apply to us, but they can't be our customers. And we methodically went about like other groups of people, and we've eventually landed on like uh, uh, other startups and mid-sized companies that are looking to incorporate Web3 into their products, either existing products or launch new products. Those are the customers we found the most traction with. And how do you measure traction, right? You can see, is there a burning need in their business for what we are providing? And if not, like, why not? Are there other competitors who are serving these cohorts of companies that are doing better than us, or are we losing like market share to other companies? Or are there like more established players? In Web3, it's a little hard. There's almost like no one that's established, right? This very fertile ground for the taking. And so in this case, you really have to like think of both future demand, but also find the way it, like the personal computing revolution started in the 70s. They were like a bunch of hobbyists, right? And it's impossible to think at the time that like Microsoft was started or Apple was started that they would become these giant things, because the community of computer users was just like a couple thousand, but they were a couple thousand really passionate people, and they were early adopters. And usually in any early adoption curve, there's a small group of people who's super in like who are super users of your stuff. And if you can find that, and if you can like identify that group of people, and then really like perfect your product for that, then as that group of people grows to the wider and wider audience, that then naturally your product keeps growing as well. So that's a high level gist, but like concretely what that has led us to is right now, especially in a bear market, the people who are still experimenting with Web3 are other startups and medium-sized companies, and that's like the group that we're targeting as a business. Individual developers can also use us, but there it's harder to justify them paying us to use our services. And you as a business, you do want to validate like people paying you for your services. A lot of companies make the mistake of not charging for their stuff, for their work, because they think like they need to get users and all that, and that's fine to get validation of your product, but it's not fine to get validation of your business, because there are a lot of good things that people will not pay for. Like, would you pay for a calendar extension, for example, right? That like just changes the color of your calendar to something? Probably not. But it might be a nice extension that I might download into Chrome. And so you want to like validate the product, but you also want to validate the business.
Right. What does it mean? Like you will reject some inbound request?
Yeah, it's possible. If it doesn't apply to like our roadmap, then yes. But it's hard to like figure out where you're saying no that will hurt you down the line, for example, right? The early stage startups, there's a lot of art as well involved here, right? And luck to some extent. But so far, we actually have not said no to a request. We mostly have figured out like when to satisfy the request, and it's like we don't immediately reprioritize our roadmap because a request came in. We just like add it to the roadmap in the future, and we figure out like in the realm of possibilities, like where should it lie in priority.
What's the considerations of the whole backlog of like feature requests and bugs requests from the focus studied customers?
Good question. So we track it pretty like consistently, similar to I did at my big tech jobs. Like we use Linear, for example. We used to use Jira, but we are very careful about logging what are customer requests. They always have a higher priority in our backlog. And also if like multiple customers are asking for something, that's like really good signal to us that that's a real gap, and we like immediately try fixing those things. Just being organized is really important. So one thing, again, like execution really matters, right? I was looking at statistics on what like what are like the statistics of startups that succeed versus startups that fail, and what like sets them apart. And the number one thing is timing. Obviously, like you can have a good idea at a bad time, and it probably won't work. But you need the timing to work out. That can be in your control, but like don't worry too much about that. The second part is the number two thing is that makes or breaks a company is execution. And so really figuring out like how can you get better at executing is pretty important. This is actually something I learned from big tech that I'm very thankful for, is like how do you run sprints, how do you organize your backlog, how do you triage items, how do you talk to customers and get feedback, and then just like make sure everything is tracked. You can have a really large backlog, but that's just more data you're ingesting to like figure out your product market fit.
Right. It's also all about speed because there are many solutions, similar solutions out there in the market. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of know like there's some alternative solutions in the market. I mean, we don't name them, right? But like, how do you kind of realize your unique selling point? In the beginning, it may look very similar, right?
Yeah.
How do you discover the USP?
Yeah, I think for us, we tried to identify. We started with blockchains that had really good user traction. Like we started with the Flow blockchain, and I actually see a question in the chat around like, will we look at building other chains? So this is actually a very good segue as well. So we started by looking at like chains that had really good user adoption, and the Flow blockchain had NBA Top Shot, which was this really popular NFT storefront for like buying moments from NBA basketball games. And so they had gone viral for like, they had like hundreds of millions of dollars in sales from users. And so this blockchain was like really successful at targeting the mass audience, especially for sports events. What they weren't good at was targeting developers to build on the blockchain. And so we identified that need. There's this gap that this blockchain is very popular. It has like, actually, I think it surpassed ETH in the number of total transactions on the chain this last month, but it wasn't good at attracting developers to build on it yet. And so we thought there's a gap there. There are a lot of developer tools starting out for Web3, but not any for this chain. So we can kind of like grow our market share here. And we've had success from there. That was a good bet we made. And so now we're looking into expanding to other chains potentially. And that comes with customer feedback, right? Like which chains are people asking for us from? We do support ETH and Polygon. We haven't like publicized that yet. We're still working through, but it's available on testnet. And so if someone's like trying to build an ETH or Polygon experience, let me know and I can like get you API keys for that. But again, like it all goes back to having some starting point. If you Google too much and see like stuff that exists out there, it might even like discourage you from even getting started. A lot of companies kind of like also talk about their roadmap as if it's already there, but then you look at their product and it's just like a form that you can request a demo from, right? Like it's crappy, it's good, but don't be disheartened if you see similar ideas. It's a lot of it is about execution. And so get started and you'll find your niche through this. And you can be very strategic about this. Like we were strategic by picking a chain that didn't have what we were offering to start with. And now because we have some success, we can go to other chains that do have developer tools, but we have a better track record now because we have like, we did this for another chain. And so it's possible to repeat that for future chains going forward.
Right, right. I mean, similar to doing like sales or like growth funnel, there are a couple like steps, right? From awareness, activations, retention, and blah blah blah.
Right.
What's some of the biggest like gap that you have seen so far, and how do you kind of mitigate a gap?
The biggest gap is probably because of the bear market itself. I think companies have gotten and I think this is true around the world. Companies are trying to revert back to like their core businesses, right? And they're trying to like cut costs and whatnot. And as part of that, a lot of businesses have cut Web3 projects because that's still an exploratory place for a lot of companies. Startups, on the other hand, are not. So like that's where our funnel is important, like target the right group of people. Startups are still experimenting. They will continue to experiment. Developers are still building. And so you can, again, be data driven about this. One of the things we looked at was like dashboards on Dune, and also for like Flow blockchain on number of contracts that are being deployed to even testnet, because that's a good proxy for seeing developer activity on a blockchain. And so that, if you look at it, even in the last year, since like uh, the value of cryptocurrencies plummeted, is like at all-time highs. You see developers are still like building a lot on chains, and so that gives us confidence that, okay, we're a developer tool. The markets are out of our control, but we see the fundamentals for developers are really strong. So let's figure out how we turn these statistics into a funnel. And so one of the things we've done is we've established a really good relationship with the Flow blockchain, where they kind of send customers our way now, because we've built that rapport. They've seen us like do this a couple of times successfully, launch products for people. And so now we have a funnel directly coming from a blockchain that is like really, really powerful. And so definitely find those like levers that you can have as a multiplying effect if you can. You have to be scrappy about this. There's no like recipe here, but figure out like what are your strengths, and how can you leverage those to even create the funnel. The last thing I'll say to that is the way you get your first customer is going to be different from like getting your next like 20 customers, right? And so you have to constantly iterate on the process itself. Eventually, we're not there yet either, but like eventually the dream is you have this repeatable sales strategy, you have a funnel coming in, and then it's just a matter of like expanding that funnel and expanding that's the sales a pool. And in that case, you can like then start paid advertising and like targeting the right groups of people, and then you can just like expand that funnel from there. But first, even like establishing that funnel is kind of the priority.
How do you find the first paying customers? Like, what's the story? Like, do they complain with you and you upgrade, and then they pay? Do they like kind of, I mean, like, if you don't mind, I mean, like, I would love to also like hear about like their background.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again, it's very organic. In our case, so we knew we wanted to build developer tools, but our first customers, actually, we built the entire experience for them. Like, we designed their website, we like hosted their website on AWS. We like did way more for our first customers than we ever would for like the next 100 customers, because it's just not a repeatable strategy. But that's the key, that we were so focused on both like validating our product, but also getting this person as a first customer, that we like built everything for them, almost like a consulting agency. They basically outsourced all the tech work to us. And so that built a lot of trust, because so this was this rap battle group. I'll actually send this in the chat. It's called like KOTD. And it's basically like these folks were not technical, but they wanted to build this experience. And so we said, okay, we'll build it for you. And that was a great like starting point. And they kind of trusted us because, again, like our resume said big tech company names. So they were like, they probably know what they're doing. So like have some social proof, I guess, but find like your strengths and leverage those, right? And so we started with that. And once we launched that experience, and it was a successful launch, that gave us like something to show other people to like as a potential thing. And like, so people like, the thing is, if you have a pitch deck or if you have a set of slides, it conveys an idea across, but nothing conveys an idea across as well as like a real live demo that people can play with and interact with. And the sooner you can get to that point, it just makes things really concrete for people, right? Both for investors and for new customers. So just like once you have that first thing you've launched, then you're like, okay, now our thing is we can build this for others. And once you do it for like 2 or 3 people, you can say, okay, we've done like this. It looks very similar across these groups of people. So now let's build APIs that allow developers to build very similar experiences. And you just like, you start very simple. We like didn't have an API even to get started, right? And we like built those abstractions over time. But the first customer, you just want to like find someone willing to work with you and have and like is on the in going in the direction that you want to like build your business in, and be scrappy and just do stuff that doesn't scale, essentially.
Cool. I kind of feel like the target audience is actually you're solving your own problem, right?
Right.
You're building websites and you find like common problem within a couple of project and you build something for your own in-house. Right? You realize that many people like you and you build it for them, right?
Exactly.
In which point do you get funding? Do you get grant from the flow, or how is the funding status right now?
So we actually raised around a $5 million seed round. So we're pretty well funded, fortunately, to last us through the winter, however many years it lasts. Flow Dapper Labs, which is the creator of the Flow blockchain, they're one of our angel investors, actually. And we were pretty serious, like especially I guess because many of us are a little older and like we have mortgages and like responsibilities. We were like, we can't just quit our jobs and not have like funding. So we were very serious about trying to get funding, and that's where like doing this part time kind of helped a lot, where we were able to build out some of these experiences without quitting our jobs to start with. And once we had like this experience, we knew the vision we wanted to take the company in. We had a pitch ready. We started talking to a few investors, and just to give you an example, like the in terms of like funding rounds, right? Like we've raised $5 million seed round, which is I think pretty good. But when we first went to an investor, they were going to give us 125K for a seed round, and that was like 3 months before we actually like raised this one. And the only difference was just the maturity of the demos and the product that we had launched until then. The idea was the same, the vision was the same, but because we were like a little bit further along in the maturity of the startup, we were able to raise like at an exponentially higher valuation as a result. So what I would say is like start talking to investors early, especially if you have a few in your network, just to see like just to test the waters, because a lot of the time what they'll tell you is like, this looks great, come back to us in a couple of months when you have something more, right? And so you start forming that relationship with them, and so it's good to like have that happening in parallel as you're building your product. But at the same time, don't raise too early either, because then you might actually like not get the best numbers that you deserve, actually. And it's not like raising money. I just want to say like I think, and especially in the startup world, we look at like these TechCrunch articles and we see like these people raise tons of money, and we're like, wow, that seems great. But if you think about it, it's like that in itself is not the accomplishment. That's just like startup capital to get started, and from there you need to actually, you're getting that money so that you can turn yourself into a profitable business at some point. And so like the real test is, are you growing your users? Are your users happy? That's much more valuable. The money part is just to enable you to do all that. So just like work backwards from what you think you need, how long of a runway you want. It's not about like raising $50 million, right? Like you don't need, if you don't need that, then don't even bother asking for that much. And so just be lean, be scrappy, and yeah, start forming that relationship with investors early on.
Cool. I mean, for some people, I mean, we also think like VC is kind of cliche. I mean, at the same time, Visa also having a little bit of influence in your own company by means of voting right on your board, and also like having a bit like ownership with the shares, right? How you advise companies, the audience who is going to establish a company in Web3? Should they go with the bootstrapping, or I mean like, or attract investors as early as possible? I just like mentioned.
It's up to you and like your specific needs, I would say. I do think going the traditional route of like getting investors is pretty valuable, because first of all, it validates in it's almost like a proxy for, does the market think you're on the right track? One of the things like you want to leverage investors for is they have a more holistic view of like they get pitches, probably hundreds of pitches a day, right? And they're like probably listening to tens of pitches every day themselves. And one of the things that you can use as like they have this map of the economy that you don't, and they can see patterns in like what you're building and what others are building, and kind of see trends that we can't always. And so every interaction that I have, at least in general in life, I try to see like what can I learn from this group of people. It's not just about convincing the investors, but you also want to see, a, are they going to be good partners for you going forward? Do they have like context of this space, and can you leverage that? Like, do they have connections in this space that you can leverage? Bootstrapping with like by yourself or getting started uh, without investors, that's also a route you can take. It's slightly riskier, but I think it like it's still worthwhile to do it. I would say at some point, especially if you're like trying to be very ambitious with your vision, it's almost like it's really hard to accomplish that without startup capital from a venture capital fund, because that just helps you hire people. It like gives you credibility in the eyes of even customers sometimes. So definitely don't discount the value of that.
With the 5 million seed round, I mean, like it's actually pretty average and above average amount in the general VC world. Congrats for that first. How are you going to spend the $5 million?
We're actually trying to make sure we don't spend it or spend as little of it as possible. We've kept our burn rate pretty low overall. Some of it is just infrastructure costs, right? So we actually cover the gas fees for customers, especially on testnet, but also like so testnet, for example, is completely free because we want developers to get started very quickly. On mainnet, we like try to figure out what demand is going to be, but we charge a monthly SaaS fee. Essentially, that's our business model, and that covers gas fees and infrastructure costs. We're making most of it back for like from our paying customers, but for the testnet tier, it's like we're paying that from our funding round, basically. The other thing is just like having really good engineers, hiring the best. That's not cheap, right? And so we're a little we don't overhire. We've hired a few, but if we see like really brilliant engineers and they're interested in working with us, we definitely don't say no to that. So in general, like I think just investing in the company is the most important thing. This is a unique moment in the Web3 market because we don't know how quickly the market will recover. So at least for us, we're trying to take the long-term view of, let's assume that we need to give ourselves a more than 3-year runway to like become profitable, for example. In that case, can this money last us that long, right? And so we're trying to be, even like with our infrastructure spending, we're trying to be pretty cognizant of that. We're using serverless compute everywhere to like keep costs down. If you're like running an EC2 instance on AWS, like consider using Lambdas, for example. They're a lot more cost efficient early on. So just be scrappy. Like we're very happy we were able to raise quite a bit of money, but we're also like operating as a much leaner startup just to make sure that we don't just burn through that money.
Right. Let's also answer another like question from the audience. This one asking, Private Chain asks, what's the product roadmap?
The product roadmap is we have a core API surface now for NFTs. You can create, mint, transfer NFTs. The thing we're working on right now is a marketplace API, so you can actually like be able to trade these NFTs with other people, and so you should be able to at the end of this quarter launch a full marketplace using Niftory's APIs without having to like build any of those marketplace semantics on the blockchain yourself. We'll handle all that for you. The other thing is just like considering other chains, and that's also, I think, Pirate Chain, you had that question, like, will I be looking at building at other chains? And the answer is most likely yes, but we are still like trying to explore what that looks like. Our general philosophy on that is we build the relationship with the blockchains first. We figure out like what the funnel looks like, what developers on that chain are, what their pain points are, because every chain is slightly different. And then we like think of how can Niftory actually benefit this ecosystem. And finally, like we're trying to go deep on wallets as well, digital wallets. So I mentioned we have like APIs to just bootstrap custodial wallets without any setup from the user's perspective. So just providing that for other chains, if we start going multi-chain, that's the main thing. And the final part is just like supporting scale. So we want to be able to support like millions of users using our APIs concurrently. We're pretty close to that, but that's probably like within this month, next month. That's the key next step for us.
These are all like awesome like tips from what you share, and you kind of advise entrepreneurs at the same time. I mean, unfortunately, we have only 1 hour talking with you. I hope all entrepreneurs learn something as a way to think about if you are unfortunately being laid off from the recent like a big tech or like the general, I mean, MNC. How you can get ready from your mindset, right? How can you actually approach some potential co-founders, right, to test your idea really fast with target audience, how to iterate really cheap, right? I mean, in which point you should find investors. I think you already have some like answers from these guests. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Sarmad. Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And just final thought is like, if I hope folks have my contact info. I'm happy to like get in touch if you need any advice. I'm always happy to talk as well. And if you try using Niftory, just like message me, and I'd be happy to like debug with you. On our Twitter, we also have a link to our Discord, so you can reach us there. And yeah, good luck with Startup Weekend. And thank you so much for having me.
Super awesome. You're so inspiring. Thanks, man. Take
care. Bye.